Nia Carter crossed the threshold of GlacierTech Solutions in Missoula, as if stepping onto a stage set against mountains carved from ice-blue light. Glass walls framed the Bitterroots, and a sky so clear it felt brittle. She carried a slim document case, no wasted motion, no apology. Receptionist Alina Vasquez rose, then paused, eyes flicking to Supervisor Greg Harlan, barreling across polished stone with a smile that never reached his eyes. "Visitors check in at the kiosk," he said, tone flat as the slate beneath them. Nia held his gaze, voice low. "I'm expected." A phone was lifted near the coffee urn. Another followed. Greg grabbed a sweating paper cup, fizz whispering. At the lid. "Expected by who?" he asked, and without waiting, tipped the drink. Syrup hissed over Nia's hair and collar, cold, sticky, stunning quiet into a sharp intake of breath. Sugar and citrus flooded the air. Alina froze. Security Officer Jamal Reed took 2 measured steps and stopped, badge catching a shard of winter. Nia blinked away the sting, unfolded a handkerchief, checked her watch, and said, almost gently, 10 minutes. She set the case on the floor like a measured chord. The elevator numbers began to descend. 17, 16, 15. Someone whispered, "Is this real?" Greg waved her toward the door, louder now, feeding the cameras. Out. Nia didn't move. Outside, the Clark Fork drifted under a rim of snow. Inside, time leaned forward, waiting. Her calm felt dangerous, the kind that belongs to people who know things others don't. Jamal's jaw tightened. Elena's hand hovered above the panic button and then fell. Nia lifted the document case. The elevator chimed. Beyond the glass, storm clouds gathered over the Bitterroot Range as the lobby braced for a name and reckoning. What happens next will shock you. Nia Carter reached GlacierTech Solutions just after sunrise. Missoula's air crisp enough to sting and clear enough to make the mountains feel close enough to touch. Snow clung to the Bitterroots like chalk on dark stone. The Clark Fork slid. Under a thin skin of ice where shadows lingered, she moved with practiced calm. Through glass walls, the lobby looked like a set stage. Slate floors, brushed, steel, a living wall of plants, a reception desk, centered like a judge's bench. She paused a beat at the revolving door, rolled her shoulders once, and entered with the measured confidence of someone who had planned every step between curb and conference table. Her work had taught her to travel light and bring everything that mattered. Ivy League degree, years in operations, strategy, a reputation for telling hard truths without drama, and a habit of carrying a crisis kit that solved problems others pretended would not arrive. She had aligned regional schedules across 3 states, soothed vendors during software migrations, and navigated boardrooms where courtesy and condescension sometimes wore the same suit. Today, she was here to deliver acquisition documents whose timing would ripple through paychecks, routes, and service calls from the Bitterroot Valley to the High Line. The packet was current to the hour, updated overnight, page tabs trimmed with care, signatures flagged, contingencies numbered. She had learned that perfection is not luck, it is logistics. The case in her hand carried final documents, signature, pages coded with unique identifiers, escrow instructions, updates to supplier terms, and a schedule for integrating field service teams so no one's paycheck hiccuped when software changed. She knew who preferred legal blue ink, who signed with a fountain pen that smudged, and who avoided morning meetings. She also knew that a lobby could turn into a test of belonging for reasons that had nothing to do with work. She had prepared anyway, not because she expected trouble, but because preparation meant she could not be shaken loose from the job she came to do. Receptionist Alina Vasquez looked up from a cluster of monitors the way careful people do, alert first, friendly next. A jar of peppermint drops sat beside a handwritten sign that read, "Please badge in." Security Officer Jamal Reed stood near a column with a stance that made space without demanding it. Supervisor Greg Harlan cut across the floor before Alina had finished standing. His smile was narrow, his badge bright, and his pace suggested that authority would fix a morning inconvenience faster than courtesy. Phones lifted around the coffee bar as if on strings. Curious eyes tracked the line of Nia's coat, the calm in her jaw, the shine of the case. Nia gave her name, meeting time, and purpose. Alina typed, eyes scanning the visitor system. The appointment appeared with a bold note, VIP intake, acquisition deliverables. Relief touched Elena's face. Greg did not shift. He leaned an elbow on the counter and asked for extra identification beyond policy. His tone stayed polite while his phrasing turned neutrality into suspicion. Jamal drifted closer by a step, open hands visible. Gaze settling on small details others missed. The sealed edges of Nia's document tabs. The damp towel folded inside her tote after the earlier spill. The way her shoulders settled rather than rose. The pattern read like a chart he had seen too many times. Montana's morning pressed against the glass, blue and spare. Trucks idled at the curb, frosting grills with breath. A raven crossed the parking deck and let out a single croak. Like a hinge, the floor reflected faces in a soft mirror that made everyone a witness. Nia steadied herself by ordering facts. She was on time. She had government-issued identification and a confirmed appointment. The packet in her case carried signature pages, escrow instructions, environmental certifications, and wage protections that mattered to people who would never set foot in this lobby. The work was not abstract. It was groceries, tuition, rent, diesel, brakes. Greg suggested she leave the case with security for screening and promised it would find legal recourse eventually. Nia declined, calm and precise, citing a policy that required in-person handoff to the executive suite. Alina confirmed the policy and highlighted the line on her screen. Greg called another desk for validation, waited 3 rings, hung up, and asked a different question. Who exactly are you to us? Nia answered only what mattered. Consultant of record, retained to deliver documents under counsel's engagement. She did not list credentials. She did not submit to a tone she had heard before in different lobbies with different carpets. Employees watched in the way people do when control meets composure. A finance associate whispered that the story would hit Slack by lunch. A designer, in a wool cap, pressed knuckles to her mouth. Jamal shifted half a step, a measured adjustment that made a direct path between the door and the desk. Elena's fingers hovered, then resumed, sending a message upstairs. Client here, clearance confirmed, please advise. Nia stood very still, because stillness often says, try me better than volume. She set the case on the counter and slid a sealed envelope across the surface, label printed in neat lines, contingency, sharing permitted. The envelope contained a high-level memo outlining the transfer protocol in language that protected confidentiality while satisfying gatekeepers. Greg did not reach for it. He pivoted to the soda incident, implying that the refusal to exit had forced escalation earlier. Elena's shoulders rose, then fell. Jamal asked evenly whether anyone required medical attention. Nia said no and noted the cup brand location of the cart and time. She did not dramatize harm. She documented it. Phones lifted higher. The room learned, if only for a second, how heavy calm can be. Nia's background rarely surprised those who checked instead of guessing. She had grown up reading contracts, at kitchen tables, translating forms for neighbors. She had survived seminars where silence hid contempt, won case competitions that ran on cheap coffee, and learned to treat process as both shield and bridge. That history sat behind her eyes now. She was not a petitioner. She was a professional doing an appointed task. Elena recognized that truth and kept working. Jamal recognized it and stayed close enough to matter without crowding. Greg recognized it and pressed harder because pressing had rewarded him before. She reviewed the packet again, searching for moisture that might have crept beneath the flap during the spill. A paper towel barrier had saved the pages. She smoothed each tab, counted signatures, and verified that blue ink lines had not smeared. She texted counsel a tight update. On site at 8:41. Reception engaged. Delivery pending. The reply came fast. Noted. Maintain chain. Call if obstruction persists. She silenced the phone and returned her focus to the lobby, to Elena's careful breath, to Jamal's squared stance, to Greg's bright badge and narrow smile. Missoula kept moving beyond the glass, serene and stark. The Bitterroots wore a thin scarf of cloud. Sidewalks gleamed. The river slid around ice like a patient thought around an obstacle. That beauty did not soften the ugliness of bias. It lit it with contrast. The room's quiet made the choices louder. Elena printed a visitor sticker and affixed it to a blank badge, then paused with it in her hand. Greg set 2 fingers on the edge, as if to stop the motion without causing a scene. Jamal asked whether Greg would like to attach a timestamp and policy citation to that decision for audit. The question put the rails under the moment. People lowered their phones, as if remembering they had jobs. Waiting can be a tactic. Nia used it. Silence made space for facts. A reply pinged from the executive floor. Please receive the guest and route to conference level A. Elena read it aloud, shoulders lowered. Greg recalculated. Jamal keyed the elevator. Nia lifted the case, towel folded, and looked past the lobby to the hills. She was not there to fix one person's judgment. She was there to deliver livelihoods. As the doors slid open, her calm held the room. Have you ever been judged unfairly at work? Nia's story is just beginning. Elena's confirmation still glowed on the monitor when Greg decided the best defense was attack. Nia stood with her coat drying in sugared streaks, refusing to shrink. Greg's smile read like a warning label. He angled his shoulder toward her. Kaysen spoke to the room as if announcing a trick. Credentials, consultant, prove you belong. Nia offered her name, time, and engagement. Nothing more. Elena cleared her throat and read the line on the visitor record again, adding the reference from legal that authorized a direct handoff upstairs. Greg waved it away. Logs can be faked. People slide themselves into systems. Jamal shifted closer, hands open. "We have a process," he said, voice level. "We should follow it." Greg did not blink. "We follow mine." Phones kept rising, little black mirrors, catching faces and fluorescent glare. Beyond the glass, the Bitterroot range wore a hard white crown under a bruising sky, and the Clark Fork flowed like a dark belt through the city. The land looked honest, severe, and unafraid. Inside, fear hid behind etiquette. Greg's tone sharpened. "What firm do you claim?" Naya answered with the name of a boutique group that had steered integrations across the interior West for a decade. Greg snorted. "Cute invention." Alina printed a second copy of the entry, highlighted the routing note, and held it up so even the bystanders could see. "VIP intake confirmed," she said. Greg glanced at the paper as if it were a parking ticket and set his elbow on the counter. "Here's what I see: a staged arrival, a costume, buzzwords, and a glued-on smile. Open the case." Naya's jaw stayed relaxed. "Professional materials and confidential records remain sealed until I reach the executive floor," she said. "That is the agreement you have on file." Jamal's eyes moved between badge, monitor, and case, weighing harm against pride. He had seen fine lines become chasms. He also knew how quickly a person could be branded difficult for asking to be treated fairly. "Let me request an escort," he offered. Greg's reply landed like a slammed drawer. "No one moves until I'm satisfied." A young engineer coughed into his sleeve and blurted, "She's on the calendar," then flinched at the sound of his voice. Greg reached for the tablet he held. The engineer stepped back, cheeks coloring. Nia pulled her phone, framed the spilled soda, the cup on the cart, and the clock above the lift. 8 minutes, she said. She wasn't threatening. She was counting. The phrase slid across the lobby like a line of chalk. An intern whispered that the clip would explode online by lunch. Someone else answered that it already had. A blogger in Helena posted the first thread. A reporter in Spokane asked for comment. A cousin in Bozeman tagged a friend in Missoula and wrote, "What is doing?" Alina set a stack of towels by the puddle, water bottles beside them, then returned to the desk without fuss. "Ma'am," she said, "I'm sorry this is happening. Your appointment is valid." Nia thanked her with a nod that held. Greg adopted a tone he used for new hires. "You like jargon," he said. "Try this one. Fraud." Alina froze. Jamal lifted his chin, attention taut. Nia didn't rise. "You are accusing a confirmed visitor of a crime without cause," she said. "Please reconsider before you compound harm." Greg clung to certainty the way a man grips a railing in the wind. He pointed to the logo on Nia's case and called it counterfeit. Alina typed, pulled up the vendor file, and displayed a contract. "Match. Registered." She read, "Active and in good standing." Greg brushed past the proof. People upload fakes. Jamal thought about the way storms roll over high ridges. First a line, then a wall, then a whiteout that erases roads and confidence. Outside, a gust shaved flurries from a cornice and let them fall in slow silver. The mountains did not care about office theater. They stood, telling the truth by existing. Nia breathed and let the moment she had learned to make silence do work. The sugar cooling on her collar bothered her less than the certainty in Greg's voice. It was the same certainty that had mislabeled customers, missed warnings, and burned. teams, it had cost people raises. It had cost people joy. "Officer," she said to Jamal, "please note my statement for your report." Jamal raised a small notebook. Time of spill. 8:36. Demand to open property. Repeated basis for refusal. Contractual privacy and policy. The exchange felt like a thread pulling through canvas. Each pass tightened the shape. The room heard the words and grew quiet because the record changed the air. A product manager started a chat labeled lobby situation and invited 6 colleagues. Within minutes, it had 100 members. Links to the visitor log screenshot began circulating. Someone cropped Elena's login before posting. Someone else reminded the group to blur faces. Another wrote that leadership should address the scene before strangers write the company's story. Greg tried a gentler angle and failed at it. "Look, miss," he said, "you might be mixed up. Maybe someone used your name. You don't want to get blamed when the real representative arrives." Nia's answer was steady. "The real representative is here. I will be upstairs on time." The elevator numbers ticked toward single digits. The lobby trembled with the feeling of a verdict that refused to arrive. "I can walk her," Elena said to Jamal. He nodded once, then looked to Greg for a gesture that wouldn't come. "Wait," Greg ordered. "I still have questions." Nia's clarity unsettled him like clear ice over deep water. He wanted fog, noise, flinch. She gave him none. "Who do you think you're impressing?" he asked. "These people." A finance analyst answered without thinking. "No, you're frightening them," then stared at her shoes. Outside, ravens tilted on the wind, and the ridgeline darkened with weather. Inside, the 4 of them stood at a human crossroads, 2 feet apart and miles uneasy. Jamal adjusted his stance by a fraction, enough to block any second spill, enough to make space. "Sir," he told Greg, "we are exposed." He meant cameras, policy, conscience. Greg heard only the challenge. He moved to the keypad and canceled the call. The elevator paused, reversed a floor, then resumed its descent. The room groaned. Nia took it in without flinching. "Delays don't change facts," she said. She could feel the mountain weather pressing on the windows, the river moving down the valley as it had before this building existed and would after. "I will deliver the documents." Jamal's radio chirped. A voice asked for clarity. Confirmed. "Guest status, supervisor, dispute, recommendation." He answered. "Confirm, dispute, escort, now." A long silence followed, the kind that teaches patience. While the channel stayed quiet, Alina refilled the printer and printed the policy excerpt that supported immediate passage. Greg reached for it. She held on. "This protects you," she said. "It protects everyone." He let go. "You're all very sure?" Nia's phone buzzed with a single line from counsel. "Hold steady." She locked the screen and slipped it away. Her focus stayed on the work, on the people whose weeks would change if signatures failed, on truck routes that crossed snowbound passes, on teams that depended on predictable pay. She carried their names like cairns, marking a trail. Greg tried one last push. "If you don't open the case," he said, "we consider the visit void." Jamal shook his head. "We don't invent rules in the lobby," he replied. "We follow the ones we publish." A murmur of agreement swept the watchers. Faces softened. Phones kept filming. The elevator bell chimed. Light pooled on metal. Alina lifted the badge with both hands, as if presenting a fragile object at a ceremony. "Executive level," she said. Greg half-blocked the path, then stepped aside when Jamal's look met his and held. Nia moved forward, boots whispering. On slate. Before she crossed the threshold, she turned toward the crowd and spoke once, not loud, not pleading, simply clear. Thank you for staying. She meant for seeing, for recording, for letting truth survive the minute. Alina joined her inside the lift. Jamal pressed the button and faced the filming phones. Shoulders broad, chin lifted, the doors closed. Missoula's winter pressed its knuckles against the glass outside, and the landscape waited with the patience of stone. Inside that patience, Nia held her timeline, her purpose, and her name. Have you felt powerless in a room full of witnesses? Nia's strength shines through. The elevator began to rise, a smooth breath in steel, when an override chimed and froze the car. Doors cracked open to a mezzanine washed in cold light. Assistant manager Laura Pierce stood there with a clipboard and a radio, brown hair pinned, expression tight. She took in Alina, Jamal, and the soaked coat on Nia's shoulders, then said, "We have security concerns." Her tone stayed polite, while it turned movement into a wall. Supervisor Harlan reports inconsistent identification and refusal to submit material for screening. Jamal kept his hands visible and his voice level. The appointment is authenticated by the system, by legal, and by the executive floor. Laura's eyes did not soften. Process exists because bad actors learn schedules. We are being filmed. We cannot invite a breach. Nia met her without flinch. I will answer respectful questions, she said, but my delivery is time-bound. She raised her wrist and checked her watch. 6 minutes. The words slid across the landing like chalk on slate. Alina stepped forward with a printed policy excerpt requiring sealed handoff to the executive suite. Laura read it, slipped the page back, and said, "I'm not satisfied." Nia set her case on the floor, unlatched both clasps, and let the lid rest closed. "My name is Nia Carter," she said. "I represent a retained consultancy. I am here to deliver closing documents valued at $500 million to the chief executive, Marcus Carter." A pause rolled through the landing as if the building leaned nearer. Elena's fingers curled around the badge printer. Jamal looked between them, reading how that number changed the shape of the air. Above, a hallway door shut with a flat click. Laura lifted her chin. "Large figures make tidy covers," she said. "Scams love round numbers. We have had attempts before." She angled the radio toward her mouth. "Greg, confirm your observation." Greg's reply came sharply. Individual refused inspection, carried a prop case with a stickered logo, used jargon, demanded access. Classic playbook. He laughed, short and pleased with himself. "Tell her the real Marcus is busy." Nia answered with patience that made the mezzanine watchers avert their eyes. "The real Marcus expects this by 9, she said. "Escrow release depends on it. Field teams expect continuity at shift change. I protect those schedules." Laura studied Nia as if a tell might appear. It did not. Jamal shifted half a pace forward, then stopped, careful to hold space without crowding. "Assistant manager," he said, "we are on camera. The visitor's status is verified. Any further delay requires written cause." Alina added. Legal attached a note establishing VIP intake. "I can forward it to you now." Laura hesitated, pulled by policy and a supervisor who fed her a certain story. The radio crackled again. Greg did not slow. Ask who sent her. Ask who pays her. She's fishing for names. People fall for a polished coat. I don't know. Reached into her coat and drew out a sealed card envelope embossed with 3 initials that matched the engagement letter on file. Call the number on the back, she said. You will reach counsel. They will confirm delivery to Marcus Carter by me today. Laura accepted the envelope by a corner, weighed it, and set it on the clipboard. And if I don't call, then you assume responsibility for a failed closing, Nia said. Penalties start at 9. Routes shift at noon. Contractors switch systems at 5. Fear fills voids by sunset. Beyond the windows, the valley opened like a book. Cloud decks slid east from the Mission Mountains, long gray hulls over timber. Sun traced a cold shine along the ridge, and the sky looked big enough to swallow certainty and return. It changed. Laura watched for a beat, then faced the matter again. Greg says he saw defiance and antagonism. Jamal answered, steady. I saw a spill that should never have happened, and calm that held the floor. Alina spoke evenly. I confirmed the appointment and the handoff protocol. The software flagged VIP. We can't pretend the data says otherwise. Greg's voice hissed back through the radio. She named the CEO like a flex. People who belong don't advertise it. He laughed again. Down the hall, a designer winced at the sound. Up on the rail, 2 engineers hovered with their phones half raised. On a downstairs screen, a lobby clip crossed state lines. An ant in Butte posted the splash frame. A union organizer in Billings asked for the company name. A pilot at the Missoula gate typed that he would avoid a firm that drenched visitors. Tags multiplied, some angry, some curious, all fast. Naya centered herself with a breath that tasted faintly of the peppermint bowl on Elena's desk. She did not ask for pity. She stood at work. Laura lowered the radio. You are certain about that figure, she said. Less challenge than invitation. 500 million, yes, Nia said. Assets, liabilities, goodwill, supply agreements. Regulatory notices. It lives in this case. People will feel it by dinner. Jamal glanced at the time. The elevator pulsed as if impatient. We are burning minutes. Naya touched the watch again. 6 minutes, she repeated. Not a threat, a truth sliding toward an edge. The phrase turned the landing into a clock face and set every stair to moving. Laura exhaled. If you're wrong, I lose my job. If you're wrong, Nia replied. 1,000 people pay in hours, paychecks, and certainty. Choose whose risk matters. Outside, the Clark Fork braided under bridges, and the flat flats of ranchland stepped away. From town, the sky moved like a roof on hidden rails. Inside, the landing pressed close around 4 people and a case that felt heavier than paper. Laura keyed the radio. Greg, stand by. I am choosing to proceed. His reply jumped back. Don't. You'll regret it. She let the threat slide and turned to Jamal. Escort Ms. Carter to the executive level. I will meet you there after I call counsel. Greg cut in, incredulous. Call counsel for a stunt. Use your head. This is theater. He laughed. Coins on metal. He still did not understand that the name he mocked shared Nia's table and life a truth she had no intention of using to win a hallway argument. Alina pressed the button, doors closed. Laura stayed behind, dialing the number from the envelope, eyes fixed on the glass, like will could bend time. The car rose again, smooth and certain. Floors ticked past. Jamal stood between Naya and the doors, not because harm was likely now, but because guarding dignity does not stop once it is needed. Naya watched the numbers and held the case. For an instant, the reflection in the steel showed snow peaks floating like islands. Montana has a way of folding itself into artificial rooms, an old country that refuses to leave, sky in your pocket, wind in your throat. By the time the car opened on the executive floor, chat threads had braided into currents. A Helena journalist pinged the company press line. A council member asked for names. People watched change gather like weather, knowing accountability would arrive soon. The elevator doors parted like a measured breath. Marcus Carter stepped into GlacierTech's lobby with a presence that tightened the air. A tall figure in a charcoal suit, carrying the calm weight of authority and the edge of winter on his shoulders. Eyes sweeping the slate floor where soda had dried to a tacky sheen. The Bitterroot peaks cut clean against glass beyond reception, and, at the center, Nia Carter, standing straight in a damp coat, chin high, dignity unshaken. Conversations stopped as if a switch had been thrown. Even the printer at Alina Vasquez's desk seemed to hold its page mid-feed. Security Officer Jamal Reed shifted subtly, setting a line of space between Naya and any hand that might repeat the harm. Supervisor Greg Harlan hovered by the coffee cart with a grin that had nowhere to go. Assistant Manager Laura Pierce came down from the mezzanine, radio blinking, clipboard clutched like a shield. Marcus did not raise his voice, and yet it carried, like wind running along the Clark Fork. Who did this? Silence answered. The snow-bright mountains beyond the glass offered a hard, honest backdrop no one could argue with. Naya met his gaze, steady as a plumb line, watermarks drying along her collar. Something in his jaw set, fury banked under discipline. He turned to the room, who poured a drink on my guest. Greg cleared his throat, trying for casual and landing on brittle. I made a call based on security concerns, he said. Visitor refused. Inspection. Identification was questionable. Situation appeared staged. We have to be vigilant. Marcus studied him the way a surgeon studies a scan, then looked to Alina. What does the log show? Elena's voice held. Appointment confirmed. VIP intake flagged by legal handoff required at the executive level. Arrival time verified. Policy excerpt printed and ignored. Jamal spoke evenly. Escort recommended by procedure. The visitor complied and documented the incident without escalation. Laura's clipboard dipped a fraction. We requested additional validation to protect the building, she said. That created a delay while counsel was contacted. Marcus nodded once, then returned to Greg, words precise as a blade. You saw a woman here to work and decided spectacle would prove you right. Greg let out a laugh that died in his throat. People fake badges and learn schedules. She named you like a bluff. I kept the company safe. Nia's voice folded into the quiet. I named him because I am delivering documents he requested. Marcus turned to her fully for a heartbeat. The professional mask thinned, not to sentiment, but to recognition of what had been endured on his watch. He faced the room again, "This is Nia Carter," he said, clarity ringing against the glass. "My wife and a major shareholder of GlacierTech." A gasp rose near accounting. Someone whispered, "Oh," and then nothing else. "She holds authority to deliver and direct integration logistics," he continued. "Any obstruction is a breach of policy and a harm to people depending on this closing." Greg opened his mouth, and only air came, then a stumble. "No one told me that. How was I supposed to know? Anybody can say anything. We get hustled all the time. I followed instinct." "Instinct," Marcus answered, "is not a license for bias or cruelty." He met Jamal's eyes. "Pull footage. Preserve every frame. Log statements within the hour. Forward copies to counsel." He turned to Alina. "Archive the visitor entries and your advisories. Send a summary to me and HR with recommendations on training gaps." Then to Laura. Radio discipline broke. Policy citations were disregarded while minutes mattered. Explain the chain of decisions that kept a confirmed consultant in a public standoff while cameras rolled. Laura nodded, color high. "I'll account for my part immediately." Marcus stepped closer to Greg until only the cart and an unspilled cup lived between them. "You humiliated a guest," he said, "and by guest I mean an executive stakeholder, by pouring soda over her head, given employees and visitors, while ignoring documentation, policy, and a colleague's warnings." Greg searched faces for a lifeline, found none, and tried one last pivot. "She was combative," Jamal replied without strain. "She was calm throughout," Alina added, steady. "I twice confirmed her appointment and the sealed handoff protocol. Refusal to honor it came from Supervisor Harlan alone." Marcus let that settle. "You are terminated effective now for misconduct, gross negligence, and violation of company policy," he said. "Surrender your badge and leave the premises under security escort." The smirk vanished as if a cord had been cut. Greg set his badge on the cart with a tiny clack and stared at it as if it might argue. A murmur moved through the lobby, not loud, more like wind combing dry grass on the flats beyond town. Marcus faced Laura. "You are suspended pending review for procedural failure. Meet HR today. Your access remains limited to complete statements and cooperate with the audit. Then go home and wait for instructions." Laura swallowed and nodded. He turned to Alina. "You showed courage, clarity, and adherence to process when it counted. Effective immediately. You are promoted to Senior Reception Operations Lead with authority to enforce intake protocol across site entrances. Compensation adjustment will follow. Training budget approved for your team." Then to Jamal. "You acted with steadiness and fairness under pressure. Effective immediately. You are promoted to shift captain and will co-chair a new incident. Response council to ensure dignity and safety are inseparable in this building." Shoulders loosened near the desk. A facilities tech whispered, "Thank you." A designer set her phone down, as if filming could finally end. Nia unlatched her case, lifted a sealed packet with tabs aligned like small flags, and said, "Delivery to executive floor, per protocol." Marcus received it with both hands, honoring weight with grip, set it on Elena's desk long enough to sign the receipt she had printed, then offered that slip back to Nia with a quiet thank you, spoken like a vow. He raised his head. "This closing secures wages, routes, and service continuity from the Bitterroot Valley to the High Line. We protect that work by protecting each other. Reform starts now, not next quarter. Outside, clouds drifted like slow herds over ridges, while a hawk hung in pale light, and inside the lobby felt charged. Grief and resolve braided into something like electricity. Marcus handed Naya a towel, careful, almost ceremonial, then shrugged off his suit jacket and settled it across her shoulders. Dignity answering dignity without theatrics. Greg murmured a protest that died when Jamal stepped beside him and gestured toward the exit. 2 officers from building security arrived as if conjured by procedure and guided him away, quiet, clean, unarguable. Laura lowered her clipboard and asked whether counsel wanted her statement now. Marcus told her to sit with HR within the hour and document everything in sequence, including radio traffic and directives issued in his name without confirmation. He signaled Alina, who opened a blank incident report and began to type, standing taller than she had at dawn. Nia drew a breath that still held a trace of citrus from her collar and said, "Escrow release will trigger on receipt integration. Timelines hold. Supplier notifications are staged for noon." "Good," Marcus said. "Let's complete signatures upstairs and then meet teams, because sunlight only helps if we move." He looked over the room one last time. Bias harms performance, reputation, and lives. When you witness it, record, intervene safely, and escalate through channels that will be strengthened after today. You will receive a schedule for training, reporting upgrades, and a listening forum open to every role. Conviction made the words ring as if the mountains had thrown them back. Phones lowered for good. An analyst closed a chat window and opened a spreadsheet as if useful work could be an act of repair. Sun slid out from behind a veil and poured over the peaks, laying light across the floor in long, clear bands that turned puddles into mirrors and faces into witnesses of their own choices. Marcus lifted the packet again and held the elevator. For Naya, Alina, and Jamal, then paused, looking at the group gathered near the cart. "I will always protect this company's people," he said, "starting with those who protect strangers when it costs them comfort." He let the doors begin to close, then added for anyone hearing and anyone watching the clips already racing. Across feeds, what happened here ends here, and the change that follows belongs to all of us. The car rose, and a hush spread that was not fear, not even relief, but the heavy quiet of truth settling into place, while wind slid along the glass outside and the ridges held their snowy lines like signatures waiting to be read. The elevator reopened on the executive floor, and the charge that had stiffened the lobby eased into a steadier weight as Nia and Marcus finished the last signatures under warm lights that made wet paper edges curl and then lie flat again. She checked every tab, verified dates, compared initials, and confirmed that the damp did not blur a single line that mattered for wages, routes, or benefits. Marcus countersigned, pressed each seal clean, and thanked her with the quiet that serious people reserve for work that protects other people's days. Only then did they step back toward the balcony that overlooked the reception, because repair belongs where harm began. Below, staff waited in clusters, phones lowered now, faces turned upward to the glass, shoulders uneven with adrenaline and shame. Alina stood near the desk with a printed receipt and a laptop open to the incident report. Jamal watched the doors, posture calm, not hard, the way mountain guides stand when cliffs end suddenly and the trail narrows. Laura sat with HR on a side bench, pencil ready, eyes tired and clear. Outside the building, Missoula stretched under a broad winter sky, the Bitterroot foothills wearing sun-like thin cloth, the Clark Fork sliding in a dark, steady band between pale banks. The beauty looked like a truth that did not need to be shouted. Marcus raised a hand, and the lobby hushed, not because volume rules demanded it, but because the room wanted direction more than spectacle. He spoke plainly, the way he had learned to speak in machine shops and boardrooms alike. "We close our acquisition today," he said, "and we will close it without sacrificing dignity or safety. Lines open, and we will own the harm done in this room." He paused long enough to make space for people to breathe, and then continued with steps, not slogans. "Effective, immediately, bias training is mandatory for every badge that opens these doors, including mine. Attendance will be tracked, content will be practical, and follow-up sessions will be scheduled by role. Diversity audit from an independent firm. Publish the findings, and accept the uncomfortable truth that will emerge. Policy will be rewritten where ambiguity gave cover to cruelty. Consequences will be real." A murmur ran through the crowd, softer than before, like wind passing through tall grass along the valley floor. Jamal's radio clicked once and went silent, as if the building itself wanted to listen. Alina lifted the receipt, and Marcus signed it where her cursor glowed. Nia placed the sealed packet in his hands again for transfer to council and, with that small motion, ensured that the acquisition's timed release moved forward. A courier trotted to the elevator with a hard case, and legal followed with a rolling bag of certified copies. Up on the balcony rail, snowlight threw a quiet shine across glass and steel. Phones rose again, but now framed a different picture. A leader outlining work, a woman standing steady, a staff deciding what kind of company it would be. Outside the walls, the story raced. Clips of the spill and the confrontation were stacked into threads. Within minutes, #GlacierTech Justice climbed city feeds, then regional lists. A union chapter in Billings urged members to document bias safely. An investor in Seattle wrote that accountability was the only acceptable outcome. A teacher in Butte told students that policy mattered because people matter. The tone across most posts carried something rare on frantic days: seriousness without glee. No one cheered humiliation. They wanted repair and proof it would last. Marcus spoke again, naming actions by department. Security will rotate supervisors. While the audit proceeds, facilities will review camera coverage and lighting to ensure that shadows cannot be used as an excuse. Reception will gain authority to halt anyone who bypasses protocol, regardless of title. HR will update reporting channels and add protections for those who intervene. Every manager will hold listening sessions and submit summaries within 2 weeks. He thanked Alina and Jamal in front of everyone for choosing courage and process when pressure tried to bend both. Applause followed, short and full, not noisy, more like an agreement signed by palms. Nia stepped to the rail and spoke with the spare grace of someone who had spent a career trading heat for clarity. "The documents are safe," she said. "The closing moves forward. and the people who depend on its timing will not feel the wobble that almost began here. She looked across the lobby, letting her gaze rest on faces that had watched, filmed, and waited. I am grateful for those who stood close. I am asking the rest of you to practice now so the next person does not stand alone. Her voice held steady and then eased, as if the cold on her collarbones had finally given way. Laura's pencil trembled and stilled. She told HR she understood why suspension was warranted and that she would give a full account without hedging. She did not ask for mercy. She asked for accuracy. That choice did not erase harm, but it cleared the ground for learning. Jamal began coordinating a chain of evidence. He logged times, pulled stills, and wrote a summary that refused spin. Had seen angles cameras missed. Alina drafted a new intake checklist and, before lunch, posted it at every monitor so no desk would be left behind under stress. She built a short script that reception could use when challenged, a few lines designed to slow hot moments and anchor them in policy. The building started to feel different, not quite exactly, but aligned. PR released a brief note acknowledging the incident, naming the audit, outlining the training, and promising updates after milestones rather than vague pledges. Comments flooded in, some angry, some hopeful, many wary. But the thread stabilized as people saw times, dates, names, and actions. Council sent a memo to partners and regulators confirming that documents had been delivered, signed, scanned, and transmitted on schedule. Banks confirmed receipt, escrow replied, ready, and vendors acknowledged the timeline for system switches. Operations confirmed routes would hold, and technicians would receive credentials. Through the glass, the valley offered a lesson in scale. Fields lay quiet under winter sun, barns watched without hurry, and distant ranges drew a clean horizon. That asked complicated rooms to grow up. Naya read messages from strangers who recognized themselves in her mourning and answered with brief notes, pointing them toward the channels now opening here. A clerk wrote that he had swallowed slights so often that he no longer tasted coffee, and she told him that documentation and allies could change a day faster than anger alone. A nurse said she had filed a report once and learned what retaliation feels like, and Nia shared names of groups that protect whistleblowers. A student asked how to stay calm when shouting would be easier, and Nia said preparation makes composure possible. Near the kiosk, two analysts traded glances and admitted they had stayed quiet because they feared losing favor. Have you stayed silent during injustice? It's never too late to act today. Within a week, GlacierTech moved from promises to structure. Marcus signed an executive directive that put Nia's reform plan into motion line by line, and the building learned a new rhythm. An anonymous reporting channel went live first, visible on every portal and kiosk, with a short pledge at the top that said retaliation would cost jobs and budgets. Reports could be sent by text, email, or a phone line managed by an outside ombuds office after hours. QR codes appeared beside fire maps and badge readers. Posters in plain language showed examples of bias, harassment, and gatekeeping. They explained how to capture details without risking safety. Alina coordinated the rollout from her news station, greeting visitors while guiding colleagues through the tools as if she were tuning a radio until voices came through clean. Jamal met with the vendor to test encryption and confirm that every message would receive a case number and a reply within 2 business days. No one would be left shouting into a void. Cases began to arrive, some fresh, some going back months. Each note went to a triage group led by HR, legal, and security, with Jamal as co-chair. He insisted on timelines, written findings, and restorative steps when damage could be repaired. Where harm required stronger action, consequences followed quickly and cleanly. Quarterly training launched next, real, brief, and practical. Modules used scenes from warehouses, vans, and desks, not abstract lectures. One clip opened on a loading bay under a storm rolling over Lolo Pass. Another showed a meeting where jokes drowned out an analyst with data. Teams practiced lines that slowed harm without turning bystanders into enemies. Let's check policy. I want to hear her finish. We can move this to a private space. Facilitators rotated from operations, engineering, and customer care so that no one could claim that respect was only HR's job. Role play felt awkward, then useful, then normal. Diverse hiring arrived with the same attention to detail. Recruiting opened pipelines to state schools, tribal colleges, and military transitions. Job posts dropped jargon and listed skills in plain terms. Panels mixed departments, so one gatekeeper could not shape a slate alone. Metrics tracked interview stages, offers, and retention, not just headcounts at the end. The first cohort included a systems analyst from Browning, a dispatcher from Crow Agency, and a safety lead who had managed wildfire crews near Seeley Lake. Mentors received time on calendars and credit in reviews. Quiet contributors found sponsors. Change reached the market. As the audit began, investors braced for delay, then watched the acquisition close cleanly and turn promises into evidence. The stock lifted, first a small climb, then a steady rise across 2 weeks as analysts praised transparency and execution. A note from a regional fund called The Response, a textbook display of risk control. Local suppliers said orders arrived on time, trucks left yards with fewer hiccups, and invoices cleared without stutter. News outlets carried the story past county lines. Missoula Radio hosted a call-in hour where technicians, nurses, and teachers compared notes on gatekeeping and repair. A Helena paper ran a feature on the reforms with photos of the lobby framed by mountains. Alina at her station, and Jamal in a briefing room pointing at a map of entrances and blind corners. Regional television covered the training day on the floor above the glass wall, where windows showed the Bitterroot range under thin clouds that moved like breath. A national site published inexplicable on anonymous reporting built for people who juggle shifts, kids, and snow tires. Inside GlacierTech, the tone shifted from fear to practice. Elena's desk became a hub where policy felt human. She organized morning huddles with reception, shipping, and facilities so frontline staff could trade notes about visitor flow and pressure points. She added a whiteboard that tracked small wins, a corrected badge label, a tour for a high school class, and a referral for an internship. Her emails matched her voice, clear, warm, precise. People stopped by with questions because answers arrived without judgment. Jamal led with fairness that did not soften standards. His team walked routes at dawn to test sightlines and locks. He set a rotating post near the coffee bar during peak hours, not as a show of force, but as a reminder that safety and welcome belong together. He hosted debriefs after incidents, asking what worked, what missed, and what might keep the next problem small. When new hires joined, he greeted them by name and handed them a slim handbook that fit a back pocket. Inside the cover, a line waited, "Dignity is policy made visible." The audit produced hard pages. Charts showed gaps in advancement and pay across roles. Survey lines revealed where jokes had been used as cover. Marcus released the findings and accepted the parts that stung, then posted deadlines for fixes with owners beside each date. Nia sat in the back row during the town hall and watched heads lift at the sight of a plan that did not hide behind vague verbs. She spoke once to thank staff who wrote candid responses and to remind the room that reform is a habit, not a headline. Montana itself seemed to nod at the shift. The Bitterroot River slid through cottonwoods, clear and cold, and the air carried the bright smell of snow catching the sun. On breaks, teams walked the path along the Clark Fork and talked about training or nothing at all, boots scuffing frost as ravens traced easy loops above the water. The land was not sentimental, it was steady, and that steadiness soaked into the work. As spring edged toward town, applications rose, referrals increased, and internal transfers began to match ambition instead of politics. A recruiter announced that a veteran from Great Falls had accepted a role on the fleet analytics crew. A supervisor asked to step back and attend coaching after reading the audit. An engineer admitted he had laughed along once and wrote the person a note, then asked how to help build a better meeting culture. These were small moves, but they stacked into a change people could feel underfoot, like packed trail snow that no longer gives way. Nia kept traveling between sites while the acquisition settled, meeting crews in shops where the heat smells like oil, in conference rooms that overlook yards full of trucks, and in small offices where plants need water and tape has been used too long. She carried the same black case, now with new tabs and timelines, and left one page everywhere she went, the steps for documenting harm, the promise of a response, and the names of people who would answer. Everywhere she walked, someone stopped her to say a version of the same sentence. "I thought I was alone until this week." Coverage kept rolling, but the tone changed there too. Early clips showed the soda and the smirk. Later pieces showed timelines, data, and human work. A panel on public radio discussed dignity as an operational asset, and a business journal profiled Alina and Jamal as examples of leadership that listens while it enforces. When a national outlet asked Nia to retell the morning as spectacle, she declined and offered a checklist readers could carry into their buildings. The piece ran with a photo of mountains reflected in the lobby floor and a caption that named the reforms before it named the shock. In quieter hours, staff wrote reflections for an internal forum. A dispatcher described the relief of knowing that if she flagged a problem, the note would be read, tracked, and answered. A driver said quarterly training gave him words that helped him avoid starting fights. A designer wrote that the whiteboard at reception reminded her that culture is 100 small choices made every day. Marcus replied to threads late at night with thanks and updates, then logged off so the conversation belonged to the people doing the work. By the time the first quarter closed, the company looked less brittle. turnover dipped, absenteeism eased, and customer notes mentioned kindness along with speed. The share price sat higher than winter's low, not because the market forgot what happened, but because it saw how a hard morning became a plan. On a Friday, the sky over Sentinel shone that tight, clear blue that follows fresh snow and sunlight. Spilled across the lobby, where Alina had set a bowl of peppermint drops beside a stack of visitor badges, under a small sign that read, "Welcome, please check in." Jamal paused by the cart where the worst moment had begun and showed a new hire how to greet a stranger with respect and verification in the same breath. The new hire nodded, then did it twice, and did it better the second time. By summer, national outlets invited Nia to speak about the design of fair systems. She shared checklists, case studies, and quiet habits that help teams turn values into procedures. 6 months after the morning that cracked GlacierTech open, Missoula moved under wide summer light, and the company moved with it. The workforce now included teams led by people who had once felt invisible, and the number was not a slogan on a slide. 35% of leadership roles were held by minority professionals whose work showed on dashboards, routes, and balance sheets. Quarterly training had settled into muscle memory rather than theater, and the anonymous channel delivered case numbers and replies that people trusted. Employee satisfaction climbed with each month's survey, not because of a single campaign, but because process and respect finally walked the halls together. Turnover dropped as teams saw real paths, and managers learned to be measured by outcomes and fairness at once. Investors noticed steadiness. Customers noticed care. Montana's summer made everything look honest. Cottonwoods flicking coin-bright leaves by the Clark Fork, the Bitterroot River running cold and clear, osprey drawing neat ovals over water that kept its own counsel. Alina Vasquez thrived where welcome meets verification. Her station became a small command center that remained calm amidst waves of visitors, contractors, and deliveries. She built checklists that fit a pocket, trained a bench of reception leads at satellite sites, and added a line to every script that said, "Respect is part of intake." A whiteboard behind her showed wins in clean marker, a corrected name, a tour for a high school class, a referral that turned into a job. Alina did not chase credit. She built repeatable habits that kept harm small and doors open. On quiet afternoons, she stood by the glass and watched clouds ride the Bitterroots like steady ships, then sat back down to write clearer instructions for someone she would never meet. Jamal Reed led security with fairness, knowing where the lines belonged. He walked routes at dawn, adjusted cameras by inches, and replaced harsh signage with plain language that told people how to move with dignity. His team practiced de-escalation until it sounded natural, then drilled radio discipline until the noise subsided. After the incidents, they met in a room with a map pinned to a cork and traced every step without blame until gaps turned into fixes. Jamal's phrase from the winter became a North Star printed on training cards in small type. Dignity is policy made visible. Recruiting drew strength from places the company had once skimmed. Openings reached state schools and tribal colleges. Apprenticeships brought veterans into fleet analytics and safety roles. Scholarships tagged for first-generation students began to move resumes into rooms that used to recycle them. Panels shifted from mirrors to windows. People heard new voices, run meetings, and watched decisions improve because assumptions had to prove themselves. Metrics told the story in simple lines. Complaint resolution times dropped. Promotion pools widened, and exit interviews mentioned hope as often as frustration. Nya Carter's calendar filled beyond Montana, though she kept Missoula as her center. She wrote a brief guide that fit on 2 pages and gave it away without capturing emails. Prepare, document, triage, repair, audit, repeat. Between trips, she walked the river path where the Clark Fork slides under bridges and the smell of cut grass mixes with sun-warmed water. Sometimes she and Marcus crossed the lobby together in early light, not to replay winter, but to pay attention to a room that had decided to be better. His jacket, cleaned and pressed, hung in his office as a reminder that leadership is made of small choices on bad days. Shareholders read the same memos as technicians, and the distance between the conference table and the loading bay shrank by a notch. By late summer, a quiet tradition took root. River Day. Teams signed up to pick trash from banks along the Clark Fork and the Bitterroot, then shared lunch near Cottonwoods, while ravens eyed sandwiches from fence posts. A wall near reception held index cards where people wrote what they had learned since winter. One said, "I thought speaking up would make me lonely. It made me visible." The company closed its quarter with numbers that felt earned. Satisfaction. Scores rose into the 80s, and turnover dropped enough that crews could plan vacations without fearing gaps would break service. Vendors wrote that invoices cleared on time and that phone calls brought solutions instead of shrugs. Not every story turned upward. Greg Harlan sent applications and took interviews that ended when references mentioned the spill and the smirk. The market can forgive mistakes. It rarely forgets contempt. He picked up shifts at a warehouse outside town, showed up on time, kept his head down, and took a class on conflict at the community college. Regret makes its weather heavy and instructive. He learned that apologies mean the most when you cannot angle for reward. People noted that lesson and moved on, because accountability is not theater, and consequences are not revenge. Laura Pierce returned to work after suspension in a compliance role with limited authority and a long checklist. She documented processes, flagged vague lines, and built a habit of naming uncertainty instead of ruling through it. Her progress did not erase winter. It kept winter from repeating. News coverage shifted from shock to craft. Local outlets tracked the audit's milestones and interviewed line workers about what training had changed in the day-to-day. A national magazine ran a piece on rural companies turning values into logistics and used a photo of Flathead Lake reflecting the sky. At a town hall, an employee asked whether the company would stop talking about bias once headlines cooled. Marcus answered with dates and budgets and said the point was not to talk. The point was to lower harm so people could do excellent work. He added that dignity and accountability are not departments, they are the floor everyone walks on. Outside, that night, thunderheads stacked over the valley, and lightning sketched brief white ribs above the ranges. In the morning, the rivers ran a little higher, smooth and resolved, and the lobby's glass caught so much blue that passers-by stopped to look. Work had not become gentle. It had become fair enough that effort could show. She had spoken across the country and declined panel slots that treated harm as entertainment. And she had met people who carried their hard mornings with grace. She returned here because this place had continued to change after the cameras left. Through it all, GlacierTech kept steady, not perfect, but clear, with numbers and names that backed the claim that culture had turned. The company had learned to measure what matters and to keep measuring after applause. By the river, the surface held a film of sky that broke into scales where stones lifted close, and the current took everything forward without hurry. Have you seen change start with one voice? Nia's story proves it's possible. She walked into a lobby framed by mountains and left a company standing taller than those peaks. If you remember the sting of citrus on her collar, the iced hush of bystanders, the smirk that tried to pass as procedure, then you already know why this matters beyond one building in Missoula. On that morning, Nia Carter chose preparation over fury, policy over noise, and calm over surrender. She counted minutes while holding documents that protected wages, roots, and families, refused, invented hurdles, and met authority with evidence until leadership met duty with action. You saw the turn: a supervisor removed, a manager suspended, a receptionist and a guard promoted, signatures completed on time, and a public promise to reform. Then came mechanisms that outlast headlines, anonymous reporting with real case numbers and replies, quarterly practice anchored in realistic scenes, broader hiring that looked like the communities served, and an audit with published findings and funded fixes. Investors praised discipline instead of spin. Customers noticed care. Crews felt safer naming problems, and the work held steady under a sky that has never lied. That arc from humiliation to structured did not happen by accident. It happened because someone documented harm with details, because witnesses refused to let the moment blur, because leadership valued receipts over ego, and because reform arrived with steps, a budget, and dates. If any part of that story pressed against your memory, at a gate, a counter, a conference table, a warehouse door, a clinic hallway, a meeting where the joke carried a knife, then hear this as invitation and instruction. Tell your story precisely and bravely, so another person's day can change faster than yours did. Share what occurred, where, when, and how, what you attempted, who helped or hindered, which rule protected you, which gap invited harm, and what tool would have made the difference sooner. Add your account to a record that already includes dispatchers who refused to laugh along, drivers who tracked delays until routes were rebuilt, nurses who insisted on privacy, analysts who held the floor for colleagues with the data, and technicians who asked for the policy we wrote rather than the habit we inherited. Visit voicesofjustice.com to submit a verified account. Read others and subscribe to checklists, templates, and training scripts that turn bystanders into protectors in minutes. Download a pocket guide for documenting incidents, a triage flow for routing reports to independent review, and a simple intake form any workplace can adopt without consultants. Use 3 phrases that slow down the heat and center process. I want to hear her finish. We will follow the policy we wrote. Let's move this to a private room. If you manage a team, act today. Post a QR code near time clocks and loading docks. Grant the authority to pause anyone who bypasses protocol. Publish audit milestones in plain language. Reward interventions that protect dignity without sacrificing safety. Promote people who model fairness when nobody is filming. If you are not a manager, you still carry power. Write down names, times, places, words. Save photos securely. Send reports through the safest channel you have. Ask a colleague to walk with you when you deliver a complaint and keep a copy. Follow up until you receive a case number, a timeline, and an answer. Small, repeatable disciplines carve new channels through stone. Montana's rivers do not sprint. They carve. The Clark Fork and the Bitterroot keep moving through drought, flood, and ice, patient and relentless, shaping banks grain by grain until the landscape itself learns their route. Let those waters teach you how reform holds. Keep moving, even when progress feels narrow and cold. One documented report becomes two. One practice becomes a quarterly rhythm. One fair hire becomes a panel that looks like a region. One promotion becomes a path others can follow without begging to belong. That is how institutions change, form by form, meeting by meeting, quarter by quarter, until culture stops flexing with the weather and starts carrying weight like bedrock. This is not about punishment as theater. It is about systems that make good days likely and bad days survivable. GlacierTech's model can be copied by any shop, clinic, agency, studio, or yard that is willing to trade comfort for clarity. Open channels, train with scenes people recognize, widen hiring, audit in daylight, fund corrections, measure what matters, and keep measuring after the applause dies down. If you are waiting for permission, this is it. If you doubt your influence, remember that a calm voice holding a timeline reshaped a fortune and kept ordinary weeks intact across valleys and reservations. If you fear that speaking will cost you, know that silence charges interest. Safety built on secrecy is brittle. Safety built on structure holds. Tell your story. Ask your team to adopt the practices listed here. Invite unions, associations, boards, and investors to demand numbers instead of slogans. Teach new hires that dignity is a policy made visible. Revisit your plan every quarter so improvement does not calcify into marketing copy. And when a lobby turns cold, remember what worked in Missoula. Document, escalate, protect, deliver. Look up while you work. Montana's enduring mountains have seen storms, fires, false starts, and recoveries. They stand not because nothing tries to break them, but because rock holds beneath shifting weather. Stand like that. Stand for the colleague whose badge is questioned repeatedly. Stand for the contractor who left outside at the back door. Stand for the patient who needs privacy in a crowded hall. Stand for yourself when a room tries to shrink you into somebody else's comfort. Record the wrong route, the note, protect your proof, and keep walking until a response arrives. Then help another person do the same next week. That is how momentum builds. That is how injustice loses leverage. Join the movement for workplace justice. Share your story at voicesofjustice.com. Subscribe, contribute, and invite 5 friends to do the same. Ask your company to implement anonymous reporting, a quarterly practice, diverse hiring panels, and independent audits. Ask your investors why culture metrics are missing from decks. Ask your leaders to show receipts, not slogans. Ask yourself what you will do in the next 10 minutes when a lobby turns cold. Your story can spark change. Share it now.